They said her life was over. Serafina Caden had it all, the billions, the beauty, the fiancé, until one rainy night on the I-95 twisted her BMW into scrap metal and left her paralyzed from the waist down. The best surgeons in the world gave up. Her father, the ruthless CEO Arthur Caden, was out of options. But then a man with a frayed coat, a darker past, and a 6-year-old daughter holding his hand walked through the front door. He wasn't a doctor. He was a desperate single dad with a secret. He looked the billionaire in the eye and said 3 words that would change everything. "Let me help." But no one knew that saving her might actually kill him. This is the story of the broken heiress and the man who taught her to walk through fire. The smell of the Caden estate wasn't luxury. It was antiseptic and stale lavender. It smelled like a high-end funeral home where the body hadn't quite died yet. Arthur Caden, the CEO of Caden Hale Logistics, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the master library, watching the rain hammer against the glass. He was a man who moved continents with a phone call, yet he couldn't get his 24-year-old daughter to leave her bedroom. "Dr. Pendergast," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble of suppressed rage. "You are telling me that after 6 months and $2 million in experimental stem cell therapy, the prognosis remains unchanged. Dr. Pendergast, a man with a tie that cost more than most people's cars, clicked his pen nervously. Mr. Caden, the spinal trauma at the L1 vertebrae, is extensive. Serafina's refusal to engage in physical therapy is the primary blockage. It's psychosomatic as much as it is physical. She has given up. We can't fix a machine that doesn't want to run." "She is not a machine," Arthur snapped. "Get out." As the doctor scurried out, the heavy oak doors creaked open again. But it wasn't a doctor this time. The man standing in the doorway looked like he had walked off a construction site, though his hands were scrubbed raw and clean. He wore a faded navy peacoat that had seen better decades, and his boots left faint wet outlines on the Persian rug. He had dark, messy hair and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept since 2018. But the most striking thing was who was hiding behind his leg. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a bright yellow raincoat and clutching a plastic dinosaur. "Who are you?" Arthur demanded, reaching for the security buzzer under his desk. "How did you get past the gate? Your security guard, Mike, has a bad rotator cuff. I popped it back into place for him last week." "He owes me," the man said. His voice was raspy, distinct. He stepped forward. "My name is Declan Reed. I'm calling the police, Mr. Reed." "Go ahead," Declan said, unbothered. He looked at the ceiling toward the 2nd floor where Serafina's room lay. "But the police can't make your daughter walk, and neither can Pendergast." Arthur paused. His hand hovered over the button. Desperation makes powerful men listen to strange things. "And you can—" "I don't know," Declan admitted brutally, "but I know why she isn't trying. You've hired scientists to fix a spine. You haven't hired a human to fix the will. Are you a doctor? Used to be. A long time ago." Declan said, his jaw tightening. "Now I'm just a guy who needs a job to keep his daughter in school and out of foster care. But I specialize in difficult cases." "Papa," the little girl whispered, tugging his coat. "Is the lady sleeping?" "She's awake, Maisie," Declan said softly. He looked back at Arthur. "Give me 2 weeks. If she doesn't move a toe, you can have me arrested for trespassing. But if I get her into that wheelchair and outside that front door, you pay off my debts." Arthur narrowed his eyes. He saw something in Declan's eyes that he hadn't seen in the other doctors. Hunger. Not for money, but for redemption. You have 1 week, Arthur said coldly. And if you hurt her, I will bury you. Serafina Caden lay in a bed that cost $45,000, staring at a ceiling painted with cherubs. She hated the cherubs. They looked too happy. At 24, she was supposed to be taking over the European division of Caden Hale. She was supposed to be marrying Grant Holloway, the son of a senator. Instead, she was a doll with dead legs. The door opened. She didn't turn her head. I told the nurse I don't want the sponge bath, and I don't want the kale smoothie. Leave it. Not a nurse, a rough voice said. Serafina turned her head. A stranger was dragging a heavy wooden chair to the side of her bed. He sat down backward, resting his arms on the backrest. Who the hell are you? She hissed. Declan. I'm your new PT. I fired the last 3 PTs. I threw a vase at the last one. Good aim. I hit him in the shoulder. Decent. Declan nodded. Means your upper body strength is intact. We can work with that. Serafina scoffed, turning away. Get out, I'm tired. No, you're not tired, Declan said, standing up and walking to the window. He ripped the blackout curtains open. Grey light flooded the room, blinding her. You're bored, and you're feeling sorry for yourself. Excuse me. Serafina's voice trembled with rage. Do you know who I am? Yep. You're the girl who's letting her muscles atrophy because she thinks life ended when the airbags deployed, Declan said. He walked over to the bed and did something unthinkable. He grabbed the duvet and ripped it off her legs. Hey! She screamed, trying to cover herself, but her legs lay motionless, pale, and thin in her silk shorts. Declan didn't look at them with pity. He looked at them like a mechanic looking at an engine. He took a pen from his pocket and jammed the blunt end hard into the sole of her right foot. Nothing. He did it to the left. Nothing. Then he moved the pen up to her knee. He pressed the cold metal against the side of her kneecap. He watched her eyes, not her leg. Get away from me, she yelled, tears welling up. It doesn't work. Nothing works. Your fiancé. Grant, is it? Declan asked, casually stepping back. I saw him downstairs. He was laughing on the phone. Something about the merger going through regardless of the cripple situation. The room went dead silent. Serafina went pale. You're lying. Maybe. Declan shrugged. Maybe he loves you. Maybe he's just waiting for the payout. But right now, you can't exactly walk downstairs and confront him, can you? You're stuck here. At his mercy. At your father's mercy. Declan leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. I have a daughter downstairs. Her name is Maisie. Her mother died screaming in a hospital bed because the doctors were too polite to try the hard stuff. I am not polite, Miss Caden. I don't care if you hate me, but I will make you stand up so you can walk downstairs and sap that smile off your fiancé's face. Do we have a deal? Serafina stared at him. For 6 months, everyone had tiptoed around her. Everyone had treated her like glass. This man treated her like a weapon that needed sharpening. She wiped a tear aggressively from her cheek. If I don't walk in a week, I'm telling my father you assaulted me. Declan smirked. It was a sad, broken kind of smirk. Deal. We start at 5 a.m. Wear sweatpants. Silk is useless for sweating. He turned to leave but stopped at the door. Oh, and Serafina. She looked up, startled by the use of her first name, without a miss attached. Grant is definitely an asshole. I didn't make that part up. The first 3 days were hell. Declan didn't use the high-tech exoskeletons or the electrostimulation machines the other doctors loved. He used gravity. He made her drag herself from the bed to the chair using only her arms. When she fell, he didn't pick her up immediately. He stood there counting to 10, forcing her to struggle to engage her core to find the fight. "You're a sadist," she spat on Wednesday morning, lying on the carpet, sweat matting her blonde hair. "I'm a realist," Declan said, checking his watch. "Up, 3 more seconds." But the real therapy didn't happen in the gym. It happened during the breaks. On Thursday, Declan brought Maisie into the therapy room. The little girl sat in the corner with a coloring book, while Serafina groaned through core compressions. "Why is she here?" Serafina grunted. "Can't afford a sitter. Arthur, your dad, is paying me upon completion. Until then, she's the assistant." Maisie stood up and walked over to Serafina's wheelchair. She held out the plastic dinosaur. It was a T-Rex with a missing arm. "His name is Rex," Maisie said seriously. "He got hurt, too." Serafina stopped stretching. She looked at the child. She wanted to be cold to maintain her wall of bitterness, but Maisie's eyes were huge and brown and completely devoid of judgment. "What happened to his arm?" Serafina asked, her voice softer than it had been in a year. "My daddy says he was fighting a dragon," Maisie said, "but he's still the king of the dinosaurs, even with one arm." She placed the toy on Serafina's paralyzed knee. "He can guard your legs while they sleep." Serafina felt a lump in her throat the size of a golf ball. She looked up at Declan. He was busy adjusting a weight rack, pretending not to listen, but his jaw was clenched. "Your dad is mean," Serafina whispered to the girl. "I know," Maisie giggled, "but he makes the best pancakes. If you walk, he promised to make you chocolate chip ones." That afternoon, Grant came to visit. Grant Holloway was handsome in a generic, polished way. He walked into the gym wearing a tennis outfit, smelling of expensive cologne. "Sarah, darling," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. He didn't look at her eyes. He looked at her reflection in the mirror. "You look exhausted. Is this necessary?" Dr. Pendergast said rest was best. Declan stepped between them. "Dr. Pendergast was wrong. That's why he's gone." Grant looked Declan up and down with a sneer. "And you are the help, the cure," Declan said flatly. "Grant," Serafina said, her voice unusually firm. "Did you tell the board we were postponing the wedding indefinitely?" Grant blinked, caught off guard. "Well, sweetie, given the circumstances, we can't exactly have you rolling down the aisle. It's not the image we want for the merger photos. It's better to wait until you're whole." Whole. The word hung in the air like a slap. Declan saw Serafina's hand tremble on the armrest of her chair. He saw the shame flooding back. "She is whole," Declan said, his voice dropping an octave. He stepped into Grant's personal space. Declan was 3 inches shorter than Grant, but he felt twice as dangerous. "And she's going to walk down that aisle, not for you, but to prove you wrong." "Stay out of this, laborer," Grant snapped. "Get out, Grant," Serafina said. "Sarah, be reasonable." "I said, get out," she screamed, throwing the plastic dinosaur at him. It bounced harmlessly off his chest, but the message was clear. Grant straightened his polo shirt. "Fine, I'll call your father. I don't think he'll appreciate this ruffian upsetting you." As the door slammed, Serafina broke. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, a guttural, ugly sound of pure despair. Declan didn't say, "It's okay." He didn't pat her back. He knelt down in front of her wheelchair. He took her hands and placed them on his shoulders. "Use that anger," he commanded. "Don't waste it on tears. Give it to me." "I can't," she choked out. "I can't feel them, Declan. I can't feel my legs." "Look at me," he said, his eyes locked onto hers. "Close your eyes. Visualize the nerve ending. It's a wire. It's cut. I want you to imagine a spark jumping the gap. Just a spark. Do it." They sat there for 10 minutes. Silence, except for the rain. Maisie watched from the corner, holding her breath. "Think about Grant calling you not whole," Declan whispered. "Think about the pity in your father's eyes." Serafina gritted her teeth. She squeezed her eyes shut. She focused everything, every ounce of hate and sorrow, into her right big toe. Jump the gap. And then she felt it. Not a movement, but a ghost. A tingling heat like a needle prick deep in her right calf. Her eyes flew open. "Declan." "I know," he said. He hadn't seen it, but he had felt her body tense in a new way. "I know." The war had just begun, but the enemy despair had just taken its first hit. By the end of the second week, the atmosphere in the Caden mansion had shifted. The sterile silence was replaced by the sounds of exertion grunts, the clank of weights, and occasionally laughter. Serafina wasn't walking yet, but she could stand in the parallel bars for 30 seconds. It was a miracle. Arthur Caden watched from the balcony, a scotch in his hand. He should have been happy, but he was holding a dossier that his private investigator had just delivered. "Mr. Caden." Arthur turned. It was Grant. "We have a problem," Grant said, pouring himself a drink without asking. "Your daughter is getting attached to the help. She is making progress, Grant. That is what matters." "Is it?" Grant threw a photo onto the table. It was a mugshot. A younger, angrier Declan Reed. "Declan Reed," Grant read. "Former neurosurgeon at Seattle Grace. Discharged 5 years ago. Charge involuntary manslaughter." Arthur froze. "What, he operated on his wife?" Grant said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "She had an aneurysm. He thought he could save her. He was arrogant. He slipped. She died on the table. He lost his license, his house, everything. He's not a physical therapist, Arthur. He's a disgraced butcher who killed the mother of that little girl." Arthur stared at the photo. The man in the picture looked reckless. "If he hurts Serafina," Arthur whispered. "He's unstable," Grant pressed. "And frankly, Sarah is vulnerable. She thinks he's her savior. If we don't cut him loose, she's going to fall for him. And then we lose the merger. Do you want a convicted killer as a son-in-law?" Arthur set his glass down. "Get him out of here. Tonight." Downstairs in the gym, Declan was unaware of the storm brewing. He was holding Serafina's waist as she tried to take a step between the bars. "Left foot. Come on, Sarah. Left foot." She was sweating her arms, shaking violently. I can't." "Yes, you can. Look at Maisie." Maisie was cheering. "Go, Sarah! Go, Sarah!" Serafina grit her teeth. She dragged her left foot forward. It was ugly. It scraped the floor, but it moved 4 inches. "Yes," Declan shouted, catching her as her knees buckled. He pulled her into a hug, her body pressed against his hard chest. For a moment, they weren't patient and therapist. They were 2 broken people holding each other up. Serafina smelled rain and old tobacco on him, and for the first time in her life, she felt safe. She pulled back, looking up at him. The air was charged. She saw his eyes flicker down to her lips. "Declan?" she breathed. The gym doors burst open. 2 security guards marched in, followed by Grant and a stony-faced Arthur. "Step away from my daughter," Arthur commanded. Declan stiffened. He didn't let go of Serafina immediately, making sure she was balanced in the chair first. "What is this?" "You're fired," Grant said gleefully. "Pack your trash and your brat." "Dad, what are you doing?" Serafina cried. "I just took a step. I moved." "He's a liar, Serafina," Arthur said, tossing the dossier onto her lap. "He's not a therapist. He's a doctor who lost his license for killing a patient. His own wife." Serafina froze. She looked at the file. The mugshot. The headlines. "Surgeon's hubris leads to tragedy." She looked up at Declan. He wasn't denying it. His face had gone pale, the light leaving his eyes. He looked at Maisie, who was shrinking back in fear. "Is it true?" Serafina whispered. Declan's voice was hollow. I tried to save her. No one else would operate. I had to try." "You lied to us," Arthur said. "Get out, before I call the police." "Sarah," Declan pleaded, reaching out. "The method works. You're walking. Don't stop now." "Don't touch me," she said, her voice cracking. She felt betrayed, not because of his past, but because he hadn't trusted her with it. She felt like another project, another attempt for him to fix his past mistakes. "Just go." Declan looked at her devastated. He went to the corner, picked up Maisie, who was crying silently, and walked out into the rain without a word. Serafina watched him go. And just like that, her legs felt dead again. The silence returned to the Caden estate, but it was heavier now. It wasn't the silence of a library. It was the silence of a tomb. 3 weeks had passed since Declan and Maisie had been escorted out by security. In that time, Serafina Caden had not moved her legs once. The ghost of a sensation she had felt, that spark in her toe, had vanished, smothered by a blanket of depression so thick she felt she was suffocating. Arthur Caden brought in a new team. Dr. Aries Thorne, a specialist from Switzerland, with a jawline sharper than his scalpel and a bedside manner cold enough to freeze water. "We will focus on acceptance," Dr. Thorne said, adjusting his rimless glasses. "The previous intervention was dangerous. False hope is a neurotoxin, Miss Caden. You must learn to maximize your life from the chair. There are very elegant motorized options now." Serafina lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Get out," she whispered. "Miss Caden, I said get out." She swept a tray of organic broth off her bedside table. It shattered against the wall, staining the silk wallpaper. Downstairs, the atmosphere was different. It was celebratory. Grant Holloway was drinking Arthur's 1945 reserve whiskey. "It's for the best, Arthur," Grant said, swirling the amber liquid. She was becoming irrational. "Now we can focus on the merger. The board is getting anxious. They want to see the wedding date set, a symbol of stability." Arthur looked tired. The circles under his eyes were dark purple. He missed the sound of the little girl Maisie laughing in the halls. He missed the fight in his daughter's eyes. "She won't marry you, Grant. Not like this." "She will." Grant smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because she has no one else. You're getting old, Arthur. Who will protect her when you're gone? She needs a husband. She needs a caretaker." That night, a storm battered the estate, knocking out the Wi-Fi. Serafina, unable to sleep, wheeled herself to her father's study to find a book. She wasn't supposed to be there. Arthur hated anyone touching his desk. As she maneuvered around the mahogany desk, her wheel caught on the edge of the rug, knocking over a stack of files. Papers spilled everywhere. Grumbling, she leaned down to pick them up. Her fingers brushed against a blue folder marked Confidential. Caden/Holloway Incident Report. Supplemental. She paused. The official police report had called her crash an accident due to inclement weather and hydroplaning. She opened the file. It wasn't a police report. It was a private investigation report, commissioned by her father's insurance company, but never released. Observation. Telematics data from the BMW X5 indicates the vehicle did not lose traction due to water. The vehicle swerved to avoid a secondary object. Secondary object. A black sedan license plate partially obscured. Make Porsche Cayenne. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. Grant drove a black Porsche Cayenne. She flipped the page. There was a blurry traffic cam photo. It showed her car spinning out, and in the corner of the frame, a black Porsche speeding away. The brake lights weren't on. He hadn't stopped. She read the investigator's notes at the bottom. Client Grant Holloway requested investigation be halted. Payment settled out of court. Reason: conflict of interest. The room spun. It wasn't an accident. Someone had run her off the road. And that someone was the man currently sleeping in the guest wing, the man pressing to marry her. Grant hadn't just waited for her to die. He had tried to kill her. And when that failed, he decided to marry the wreckage to get the company. She needed to leave. Now. But she couldn't walk. She couldn't drive. She was a prisoner in a castle built by her father and guarded by her would-be murderer. She rolled backward, her hands shaking so hard she could barely grip the rims. She needed an ally. But who her father was blinded by business. The staff were loyal to the paychecks. Then she remembered the security guard, Mike, the one with the bad shoulder, the one Declan had fixed. It was 2 a.m. The house was asleep. Serafina sat in the garage wearing a dark hoodie and sweatpants. She had packed a backpack with cash she had raided from the safe, about $10,000, and her phone. The side door opened. Mike, the burly security guard, stepped in. He looked terrified. "Miss Caden, if your dad finds out, I'm dead. I'm literally dead." "If you don't help me, Mike, I'm dead," Serafina said, her voice steel. "You owe Declan. You said he fixed you." Mike rubbed his shoulder. "Yeah, he did. Good guy. Got a raw deal. Take me to him. Missy lives in the 9th district. It's not a place for a lady like you, especially in a chair. Put me in the van, Mike." The drive took 40 minutes. They left the manicured lawns of the Caden estate and descended into the city's industrial underbelly. The streetlights flickered. The roads were potholed. Mike pulled the unmarked delivery van up to a crumbling brick apartment complex that smelled of sulfur and wet concrete. "Apartment 4B, Mike said. "I can't go up. I have to get back before the shift change." "Help me out," she commanded. Mike lifted her out of the van and set up her collapsible wheelchair on the cracked sidewalk. "Good luck, Miss Caden." He drove off, leaving the heiress of $1 billion empire sitting alone in an alleyway surrounded by trash cans and the sound of distant sirens. She pushed herself toward the building. The elevator was broken. Of course it was. She looked at the stairs. 4 flights. "Damn it," she hissed. She sat there for 5 minutes contemplating calling Mike back. But then she thought of the file. She thought of Grant's smile. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She dragged her body out of the chair and onto the dirty concrete of the stairwell. She reached up, grabbed the rusty railing and pulled. Row. Pull. Drag. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than the board meetings. Harder than the therapy. Her knees scraped against the concrete. Her fingernails broke. She was sobbing by the second floor, her body screaming in protest. But Declan's voice was in her head. "You are not a machine. You are a fighter." It took her 45 minutes to crawl up 4 flights of stairs. When she reached the landing of 4B, she was covered in dust, blood, and sweat. Her wheelchair was still downstairs. She reached up and pounded on the peeling paint of the door. "Declan!" she screamed. "Declan!" Inside she heard movement, the sound of a chain sliding. The door cracked open. Declan stood there, shirtless, holding a baseball bat. His eyes were wide, expecting a drug addict or a robber. When he looked down and saw Serafina Caden lying on his welcome mat, looking like a soldier who had crawled through a minefield, he dropped the bat. "Sarah." He fell to his knees. "My God. What happened? Who hurt you?" He scooped her up in his arms. He didn't struggle. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her into the tiny, dimly lit apartment. It was clean, but sparse. A mattress on the floor for him, a small bed with a dinosaur duvet for Maisie in the corner. He set her down on the mattress. "Maisie, stay asleep," he called out softly, though the girl was already stirring. Declan grabbed a wet cloth and started wiping the dirt from Serafina's face. His hands were shaking. "Tell me, did he hit you? Did Grant hit you? He tried to kill me." Serafina gasped, clutching Declan's wrist. "The accident! It wasn't an accident. It was Grant!" Declan froze. The cloth stopped moving on her cheek. He closed his eyes, a look of profound pain crossing his face. "I know." Serafina pulled back. "What?" Declan stood up and walked to the kitchenette. He turned his back to her, gripping the edge of the sink. "I didn't just come to your house for a job, Sarah. I came because I couldn't live with the guilt anymore." "What guilt? You didn't know me." "I was there." Declan turned around. "That night on I-95, I was driving the truck behind you. I saw the Porsche clip your bumper. I saw you spin out. I saw him drive away. You saw it. I was the one who pulled you out," Declan said, his voice cracking. "The ambulance was 20 minutes out. You weren't breathing. Your spine was crushed. I used a tire iron to pry the door open. I did CPR on the side of the road in the rain. I kept your heart beating until the paramedics came." Serafina stared at him, tears streaming down her face. The mystery of her survival, the angel, the EMTs said, must have been there. Was him. "Why didn't you stay? Why didn't you tell the police?" "Because I had a warrant," Declan said bitterly, "for the unpaid medical bills from my wife's treatments. If the cops found me, they would have taken Maisie into foster care. So when I heard the sirens, I ran. I left you there." He walked over and knelt before her again. "I left you, and I watched the news for 6 months. I saw you weren't walking. I knew the doctors were failing you. I knew I had saved your life, but I hadn't saved you. That's why I came to the house. To finish the job. To make you walk. It was my penance." Serafina looked at this man. This broken, beautiful man who had lived in hell to keep his daughter safe, who had saved her life twice. She didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. She reached out and cupped his face. His stubble was rough against her palm. "You didn't leave me, Declan," she whispered. "You came back." Declan leaned into her hand, closing his eyes. "I'm nothing, Sarah. I'm a felon. I'm a broke mechanic. I can't help you fight a billionaire." "I don't need you to fight him," Serafina said, her voice hardening. "I need you to help me stand. I need to walk into that boardroom on Monday morning. I need to look him in the eye." "Sarah, you're not ready. It takes months." "I have 2 days," she cut him off. "We work until I pass out. Then we wake up and do it again." Maisie popped up from her bed, rubbing her eyes. She saw Serafina on the floor and Declan kneeling. She grabbed Rex the dinosaur and waddled over. "Is the lady staying for pancakes?" Maisie asked sleepily. Serafina smiled through her tears. "Yes, Maisie. But first your daddy is going to teach me how to slay a dragon." Declan looked at Serafina. He saw the fire in her eyes. It was the same fire he had lost when his wife died. But looking at her, he felt a spark of it return. He stood up. He offered her his hand. "Okay," Declan said. "Let's get to work." The next 48 hours were a blur of agony. Declan turned the small apartment into a gym. He used chairs, the kitchen counter, and his own body as leverage. "Engage the glutes. Squeeze." Declan roared as Serafina tried to stand, holding onto the refrigerator handle. She screamed in frustration. She fell. She bled. "Again," Declan barked. "I can't. Grant is driving your car. Grant is signing your checks. Grant is laughing at you," Declan shouted. Serafina roared and pushed up. Her legs shook like leaves in a hurricane. She locked her knees. She stood. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. "Step," Declan commanded. "Take the step." She dragged her right foot. It felt like moving through wet cement. But it moved. She placed it flat. She shifted her weight. She took another step. She collapsed into Declan's arms, sobbing. But this time, they were tears of victory. "You got it," Declan whispered into her hair, holding her tight. "You got it." On Sunday night, the night before the emergency board meeting, where Grant was set to take full control of Caden Hale due to Serafina's incapacity, they sat on the floor eating pizza. "How are we going to get in?" Serafina asked. "Security will spot you." "We don't go in the front," Declan said, sketching a diagram on a pizza box. "I know the service entrances. I used to deliver HVAC parts there. But once we're in, it's all you. You have to walk into that room. No wheelchair. If you fall, they win." "I won't fall," Serafina said. She looked at Maisie, who was asleep with her head on Serafina's lap. "I have too much to lose now." Declan looked at her. The air shifted. The intensity of the training faded, replaced by something warmer, more dangerous. "Sarah," he said softly, "when this is over, you go back to your life. You take the company. You forget about this place." "Is that what you want?" she asked, her blue eyes piercing him. "It's what you deserve. You're a queen. I'm just the guy who fixes things." Serafina leaned forward. She bridged the gap between them. She kissed him. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was desperate tasting of tomato sauce and longing. Declan hesitated for a split second, then wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as if he was trying to merge their souls. When they broke apart, breathless, Serafina rested her forehead against his. "I'm not going back to my life, Declan," she whispered. "I'm building a new one." The next morning, the sun rose over the city. It was Monday, Judgment Day. Arthur Caden sat at the head of the massive boardroom table. Grant sat to his right, looking smug in a three-piece suit. "Gentlemen," Grant addressed the 12 board members, "it is with a heavy heart that I invoke Article 15. Due to Serafina's tragic and permanent condition, she is unfit to lead. As her fiancé and proxy, I will assume the role of CEO, effective immediately." Arthur looked down at the table. He felt defeated. He reached for the pen to sign the transfer order. "Sign here, Arthur," Grant said, sliding the paper forward. Arthur uncapped the pen. Bam! The heavy double doors of the boardroom didn't just open. They were kicked open. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was not a security guard. It was Declan Reed, wearing a cheap suit he'd bought at a thrift store, looking like a bodyguard for the underworld. "Security!" Grant yelled, standing up. "Get this trash out of here." "Wait," Arthur said, squinting. Declan stepped aside. Behind him, holding on to the doorframe, stood Serafina. She was wearing a white dress, simple and elegant. She was not in a wheelchair. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Serafina let go of the doorframe. She wobbled slightly. Declan took a half step toward her, his hands ready to catch her, but he stopped himself. She had to do this alone. She took a step. Her heel clicked against the marble floor. Click. She took another. Click. Grant's face went white. It was as if he was seeing a ghost. Impossible. Dr. Pendergast, who was sitting in the corner, whispered. Serafina walked the length of the boardroom. It was slow. It was painful. Every step was a battle against gravity and biology. But she did not stop until she reached the head of the table. She stood directly in front of Grant. She was almost eye level with him now. "Sarah," Grant stammered, sweating. "Honey, this is a miracle. I'm so happy." "Sit down, Grant," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of a guillotine. She turned to her father. "Dad, don't sign that." "Serafina." Arthur breathed, tears welling in his eyes. You're walking." "I am," she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out the blue file. She threw it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Arthur. "What is this?" Arthur asked. "Proof," Serafina said, staring daggers at Grant. "Proof that my paralysis wasn't an accident. It was an attempted assassination." Arthur opened the file. His eyes scanned the photos, the telemetry data, the payment to the investigator. Slowly, Arthur Caden's face changed. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by the cold, terrifying rage of a father whose child was hunted. He looked up at Grant. "Grant," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper that terrified everyone in the room. "Why is there a picture of your car pushing my daughter off the highway?" Grant panicked. "It's fake. That man, that convict, he forged it. He's manipulating her." "The timestamps are verified by the insurance database," Serafina said calmly. "And I have a witness, the man who pulled me out of the burning car while you drove away." She pointed at Declan. Grant lunged. Whether it was desperation or madness, Grant realized his life was over. He grabbed a heavy glass water pitcher and swung it at Serafina. "No!" Arthur screamed. But Declan was faster. Before the glass could connect, Declan tackled Grant. They crashed into the mahogany table, sending papers and laptops flying. Grant was younger, But Declan fought with the fury of a man who had lost everything once and refused to lose it again. Declan landed a right hook that sounded like a gunshot. Grant crumpled to the floor unconscious. Declan stood up, adjusting his cheap suit. He was bleeding from a cut on his brow. He looked at Serafina. "You okay?" he asked, breathless. Serafina smiled. She didn't look at the board members. She didn't look at her father. She only looked at him. "I am now." Arthur stood up. He looked at Grant's unconscious body, then at Declan. He walked over to Declan. "The billionaire and the mechanic." Arthur extended his hand. "Mr. Reed," Arthur said, "it seems I owe you an apology, and a significant amount of money." Declan shook his hand. "Keep the money, Mr. Caden. Just clear my record, so I can keep my daughter." Arthur nodded. "Done. And Mr. Reed?" "Yeah. You're rehired." The silence in the boardroom didn't last long. It was shattered by the wail of sirens cutting through the heavy rain outside a sound that usually signaled tragedy, but tonight signaled justice. Grant Holloway didn't go quietly. As the police, summoned by Arthur's silent alarm during the confrontation, dragged him off the floor, the veneer of the polished senator's son cracked completely. He spat venom, screaming about lawsuits, about conspiracies, about how Serafina was a cripple who would run the company into the ground. Serafina didn't look away. She stood at the head of the table, her legs trembling violently now that the adrenaline was fading, leaning heavily on the mahogany surface. She watched the man she had almost married, the man who had tried to kill her being handcuffed. As the officers shoved Grant out the double doors, he locked eyes with Declan. He didn't see a victory in Declan's eyes. He saw a wall, a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. "Get him out of my sight," Arthur Caden commanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and relief. Once the doors closed, the energy in the room collapsed. Serafina's knees gave way. "I've got you." Declan was there instantly. He didn't try to make her stand. He caught her sliding down with her until they were both sitting on the expensive boardroom carpet. "I did it," she whispered, her face pale sweat beading on her forehead. "I walked." "You did," Declan said, brushing a stray hair from her face, his hands smeared with a little of his own blood from the fight. "You walked through fire, Sarah." The board members, usually stoic men and women of industry, were on their feet. Some were wiping their eyes. They had just witnessed a hostile takeover, an attempted assault, and a miracle in the span of 10 minutes. Arthur knelt beside them. He looked at his daughter, then at the mechanic holding her. "Take her home, Declan. Take my daughter home." The long road back. The victory in the boardroom was the climax of the war, but the peace took longer to win. The following months were a blur of legal depositions, press conferences, and grueling physical therapy. The story of the miracle heiress was everywhere. The media wanted the fairy tale. They wanted to hear that she was fully cured, that she was running marathons. But the reality was grittier. Serafina didn't magically heal. The walk in the boardroom had caused severe inflammation in her recovering nerves. For 3 weeks afterward, she was back in the wheelchair, unable to stand without excruciating pain. This was the test. In the past, this setback would have broken her. But now, the Caden estate was different. It wasn't a mausoleum anymore. It was a home. Declan and Maisie had officially moved into the guest wing, though guest felt like the wrong word. They were family. The sound of cartoons played on the massive television in the living room. Muddy boot prints, Maisie's galoshes were occasionally found in the foyer, and for the first time in 30 years, Arthur Caden didn't fire the housekeeper for missing them. He stepped over them with a smile. One rainy Tuesday in November, Declan found Serafina in the gym. She was on the parallel bars, sweat soaking her shirt, gritting her teeth as she forced her left leg to bear weight. "You're favoring the right side," Declan said, leaning against the doorframe. He held a mug of tea. "My left side hates me today." Serafina grunted, trembling. "It doesn't hate you. It's waking up. Pain is just the nerves coming back online." He walked over and set the tea down. He placed his hands on her waist, not to lift her, but to ground her. "Close your eyes. Find the anchor." Serafina leaned her forehead against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat. It was the rhythm she had learned to walk to. "Arthur offered me the CEO position officially today," she murmured into his shirt. "And I told him I'd take it, on one condition." She looked up at him, "That I get to build something first. Something for people who don't have $1 billion to fix their spines." Declan smiled. It was the soft, unguarded smile he saved only for her and Maisie. "A foundation. A center," she corrected. "The Reed Caden Institute for spinal trauma." Declan stiffened. "Reed, I'm a convicted felon, Sarah. You can't put my name on a hospital. We need to talk about that." Arthur's voice came from the doorway. Arthur walked in, holding a thick envelope. He looked at Declan with a strange expression, a mix of respect and apology. "The lawyer's finished with Grant's files," Arthur said. "But we found something else during the discovery phase. We found the transcripts from your trial 5 years ago, Declan." Declan turned away, his jaw clenching. "I don't want to relive that." "You don't have to," Arthur said, placing the envelope on the weight bench. "But the medical board might. I took the liberty of sending the new telemetry data from Serafina's recovery to the state board, along with affidavits from Dr. Pendergast and myself." Declan froze. "You did what? Open it." Declan picked up the envelope. His hands, usually so steady with a wrench or a scalpel, shook. He tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy watermarked paper. "Order of reinstatement, effective immediately. Dr. Declan Reed's license to practice neurosurgery is restored with full privileges. The board recognizes the extraordinary rehabilitative success in the case of Serafina Caden as proof of competence and ethical redemption." The paper fluttered to the floor. Declan put a hand over his mouth, his eyes squeezing shut. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The weight he had carried for 5 years, the label of killer, the shame that had forced him to hide in the shadows, evaporated. Maisie ran into the room at that moment, sensing the shift in energy. She hugged Declan's leg. "Daddy, are you sad?" Declan picked her up, burying his face in her neck. "No, baby, Daddy's not sad. Daddy is a doctor again." Serafina watched them, tears streaming down her face. She wheeled herself over and wrapped her arms around both of them. The titanium vow. Christmas came to the estate. It was the first time the massive tree in the great hall had been decorated in 4 years. On Christmas Eve, the snow was falling heavily, coating the world in silence. Declan asked Serafina to meet him in the garage. It wasn't a romantic setting. It smelled of oil gasoline and cold concrete. It was where they had first met, where he had fixed the security guard's shoulder, and where he had spent nights working on his old truck. Serafina rolled in, wrapped in a cashmere shawl. "The garage." "Really, I'm dressed for dinner, Declan." "This is where the work happened," Declan said. He was standing by a workbench illuminated by a single hanging work light. "The library is for the Cadens. The garage. This is for us. This is where we sweat." He walked over to her. He looked nervous. This man who had faced down a billionaire and punched a would-be murderer looked terrified. "I got a job offer," he said abruptly. "Chief of Neuro at St. Jude's in the city. Big salary. Prestigious." Serafina felt her stomach drop. "Oh. That's incredible, Declan. It's everything you lost. You're taking it right?" "No." "Why not?" "Because they want a surgeon who fixes people and moves on to the next case. I don't want to move on." Declan reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt. He pulled out a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It wasn't gold. It was a dark, matte grey metal. "I made this," Declan said quietly. "I machined it from a piece of titanium rod I had left over from a brace. It's the strongest metal we use in the body. It doesn't rust. It doesn't break. It fuses with the bone. It becomes part of you." He knelt down on the oil-stained concrete. "Serafina, you're the strongest person I've ever met. You taught me how to forgive myself. I don't want to be just your doctor or your trainer or your friend. I want to be your husband. I want to build that institute with you. I want Maisie to have a mother who teaches her how to fight dragons." He held up the titanium band. "Will you let me walk with you every step, even the days when you can't walk at all? I'll carry you." Serafina looked at the ring. It was perfect. It was raw and real, just like him. She didn't say yes immediately. Instead, she pushed the brake on her wheelchair. She unbuckled the belt. "Sarah, don't," Declan said, moving to help. "Stay there," she commanded softly. She grabbed the workbench. She pulled herself up. Her legs were stronger now, but it was still a battle. She stood swaying slightly, towering over him as he knelt. She stepped away from the bench. 1 step. 2 steps. She closed the distance between them. She placed her hand on his head, her fingers threading through his dark hair. "I don't need you to carry me, Declan," she whispered. "I need you to run with me." She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit like a second skin. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Dr. Reed." He stood up and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of engine oil, winter air, and absolute, terrified love. The walk. The wedding took place in the spring. Arthur Caden spared no expense, but Serafina controlled the guest list. No press, no business partners. Only the staff, the doctors who had helped her, and the few friends who had stuck by her. The ceremony was in the garden, the aisle a long, winding path of white stone that cut through the blooming roses. It was 70 feet long. In the front row, Maisie sat wearing a yellow flower girl dress, holding Rex the dinosaur, who was now wearing a tiny tuxedo bow tie. The music began. It wasn't the traditional wedding march. It was an instrumental version of the song that had been playing on the radio in Declan's apartment the night Serafina first stood up. Arthur offered his arm to his daughter at the start of the path. Serafina looked beautiful. Her dress was structured elegant, but short enough that her feet were visible. She wore custom-made white sneakers with lace overlay shoes made for gripping the earth. "Are you ready?" Arthur asked, his eyes wet. "I am," Serafina said. She kissed her father's cheek. "But I have to do this part alone, Dad." Arthur nodded understanding. He walked down the aisle and took his seat. Serafina stood alone at the top of the garden. 70 feet. She looked at Declan waiting at the altar. He stood tall, his shoulders back. His eyes locked on hers. He wasn't smiling. He was breathing with her. She took the first step. Heel, toe, push. Her gait wasn't perfect. It had a rhythm to it, a slight drag of the left foot, a hitch in the hip. It wasn't the smooth glide of a runway model. It was the gait of a survivor. It was the gait of atonement. The crowd was silent. The only sound was the crunch of her shoes on the stone and the birds singing in the trees. Halfway down, her left knee buckled. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Declan stepped off the altar, ready to run to her. Serafina locked eyes with him. She shook her head. No, she gritted her teeth. She squeezed her fists. She visualized the nerve endings, just like he had taught her. Spark the gap. She straightened her leg. She stood up. She exhaled. And she kept walking. When she reached him, she was breathless, her face flushed with exertion. Declan reached out and took her hands, pulling her the last few inches into his space. "You show off," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I had to impress the doctor," she teased, though she was trembling. Declan turned to the minister, but he kept one arm firmly around her waist, holding her up. And she leaned into him, not because she couldn't stand, but because she didn't want to stand alone anymore. As they exchanged vows, promising to love in sickness and in health, words that meant more to them than anyone else, their Maisie ran up to the altar. She couldn't help herself. She squeezed between them, hugging their legs. The minister paused. Declan looked down and laughed. Serafina smiled, tears spilling over, and rested her hand on Maisie's head. "I pronounce you," the minister said, smiling at the trio. "Husband, wife, and family." Declan kissed his bride. It was deep and long, a seal on a promise kept. As they turned to face the crowd, Serafina didn't reach for her cane. She held Declan's hand on one side and Maisie's hand on the other. Together they walked back down the aisle. They weren't walking away from the past. They were walking into a future they had built from the wreckage. Serafina Caden had been paralyzed, but love, it turned out, was the only thing powerful enough to make a broken woman fly. It took 6 months of sweat, tears, and absolute refusal to quit, but Serafina didn't just learn to walk again. She walked away from a life that was killing her and into a life filled with real love. Grant Holloway is currently serving 15 years in a federal prison. And Dr. Declan Reed is now running the Caden Foundation's new spinal rehabilitation center, offering free care to those who can't afford it. This story reminds us that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us is the catalyst for the best thing. We all have a Grant in our lives, something or someone holding us back, telling us we're broken. But we also have a Declan, that inner voice, or that stranger who says, "Get up." If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with more people. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of inspiration. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded to keep fighting. I'm your channel name, and remember, the only time you should look back is to see how far you've come. See you in the next video.